At first glance, they look like statues, soldiers in bright red tunics and towering bearskin hats, standing motionless outside Britain's most famous palaces. But beneath that rigid exterior lies something far more dangerous than most tourists expect. And when tourists get too close to the King's Guard's horses, something alarming happens. The horse bites, sometimes hard enough to leave bruises, drag people around, or even cause them to faint. But here's the question everyone's asking. Why don't the guards stop them? This actually happened recently. A tourist posing for a photo reached toward a King's Guard horse, and the animal bit her arm, pulling her around before letting go. But instead of stopping the horse, the soldier sat there, silent and unmoving. Why? Here's the truth that most tourists don't understand. These aren't performers or costumed actors. The King's Guard are highly trained soldiers from the British Army's Household Division, and they're on active duty. Their job is to protect the sovereign, not to entertain visitors. These soldiers have been guarding British royalty since 1660, when King Charles II was restored to the throne. For over 360 years, they've stood watch through rain, shine, and even wartime. That's not a tourist attraction. That's a military tradition spanning centuries. These soldiers stand on duty for 2 hours at a time, and during that entire shift, they're not permitted to eat, drink, sit, sleep, or even smile. Smiling alone carries a 200-pound fine. They must work regardless of weather. Blistering summer heat, freezing winter cold, pouring rain. The bearskin hats alone weigh nearly 2 pounds and are incredibly warm. But they don't move. They don't react. And they absolutely don't talk to tourists. In fact, they're not allowed to. Their job is to be invisible guardians, not tour guides. So when a tourist starts provoking their horse, the guard can't simply say, "Please move back." But here's where it gets interesting. The horses themselves are the ones doing the biting, and there's a very specific reason why the guards don't stop them. For that, we need to understand what these animals really are. These are not just any horses. Known as cavalry blacks, they're specifically selected for their height, strength, and temperament, often Irish bred, with a mix of thoroughbred and Irish Drought ancestry. They stand over 16 hands tall and carry around 18 stone in weight. And these horses are trained for 8 to 10 months before they ever appear in public. They're drilled to ignore artillery fire, loud bands, screaming crowds, traffic noise, and sudden movements. They're some of the most desensitized animals on Earth. But here's the crucial detail everyone misses. Despite that training, these are still living animals. They can't stand perfectly still in cramped spaces for hours. Here's the thing. There are signs everywhere. Clear ones right next to the horses, warning tourists in plain English. Beware, horses may kick or bite. Don't touch the reins. The army has literally done everything possible to warn you. But tourists keep ignoring the warnings. They walk right up, stand under the signs, and pose for photos inches away from animals that weigh over 1,000 pounds and have teeth designed for biting. The results are predictable. In the most viral incident, a tourist approached a King's Guard horse for a photo, and the animal bit her arm, pulling her back and forth before finally letting go. She clutched her arm, then collapsed and fainted, all in front of a warning sign. Now, watch what the guard does next. He points toward the crowd and says, "Can you go and get a police officer?" He's breaking his silence, but not to stop the horse. He's getting help for the injured tourist. Guard training explicitly allows them to break silence in emergencies, and if people act aggressively or get dangerously close, they can shout warnings or even present bayonets. But the horses are trained to handle the public before the guards need to intervene. Here's the deeper story. These horses aren't just guards. They're part of a breeding and training tradition that goes back hundreds of years. Since the 17th century, the British cavalry has been breeding horses specifically for military service. Cavalry soldiers riding these horses were once a critical force on battlefields, used to smash through enemy formations and carry officers into combat. Today, they serve a different purpose, but the training remains just as intense.
And despite their ceremonial role, these soldiers are trained to respond to threats. They can draw their swords, present bayonets, or even physically intervene if someone tries to assault a palace or harm the sovereign. In fact, guards even have emergency buttons they can press for assistance. One famously pressed his after struggling to control an agitated horse for over 10 minutes, but they rarely use them because the horses generally handle threats themselves.
Another tourist learned the hard way when a horse bit her ponytail and dragged her off balance, just for standing too close with flowing hair that the horse mistook for something threatening. The guard did nothing. And this is the pattern. The horses nip, bite, and push tourists away, and the guards let them do it. Not because they're cruel, but because the horses are doing exactly what they're trained to do: protect themselves and protect their post. So why don't the guards stop the biting? Because the horses are part of the defense. The public is warned, clearly, repeatedly, and in plain sight. If a tourist chooses to ignore those warnings and gets too close to a 1,000-pound animal, the consequences are their own responsibility. The rules are clear. Don't stand in front of the guards, don't try to touch the horses, don't flap umbrellas, and most importantly, keep a safe distance. The army isn't responsible if you ignore the warnings. Army officials have even said, "We want to ensure all those who visit have an enjoyable time. Signs clearly display warnings that animals may bite. This is for the safety of those on duty and the public." The irony is that most tourists love these animals. They see them on TikTok and Instagram, think they're cute, and want to get close for a picture. But that love is exactly what puts them in danger. These horses are patient, especially considering the constant stress they endure, but they have limits. When a tourist invades their space, steps into their blind spots, or touches them without warning, they react the only way animals can, by defending themselves. As horse behavior specialist Suzanne Rogers explains, it might not be what the tourists themselves did. It might be the result of a lot of triggers. The proximity to multiple people over a long period can make horses feel very uncomfortable. Yet, it's not all viral sensationalism. In one heartwarming moment, a mounted guard moved his horse closer to an elderly veteran couple so they could pet the animal, a quiet act of respect for those who'd also served their country. Another guard moved his horse closer to a young boy with Down syndrome, letting him gently pat the horse's nose, a beautiful exception to the usual rules. Guards do have discretion, especially when they recognize that someone is being respectful. The difference is respect. Guards are trained to respond to respect with kindness and to danger with force. They're not automatons. They read situations and make judgments, even if they can't express it visible. At night, the King's Guard patrol the palaces and protect the sovereign. Their role is serious. They safeguard the monarch, the royal residences, and some of the nation's most important institutions. The day's tourists are gone, but their duty continues. From 1660 to today, these soldiers have stood watch through every major chapter of British history. They've witnessed wars, fires, and a changing monarchy. Through it all, they've remained vigilant, even when tourists haven't. So the next time you see a clip of a King's Guard horse biting a tourist, remember, the horse didn't start it. The warning signs were there, the guards were on duty, and the tourist ignored every single signal. The horse was simply doing its job. These animals and their riders protect a tradition that stretches back more than 360 years, serving a role that's part ceremony, part security, and an essential part of British heritage. They don't bite because they're cruel. They bite because they've been pushed too far. If you're ever in London and see the King's Guard, remember, they're not actors and they're not statues. They're professional soldiers working alongside living animals, carrying out a demanding and honorable duty. Enjoy the view, but keep a respectful distance. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed learning why the King's Guard horses sometimes bite and why the guards don't stop them, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are plenty more fascinating stories behind the traditions of Britain's most iconic guards.